after I put the video live on my channel announcing that I was going to be working and living in Malta for a bit, a few people reached out to me wanting to know how I'm able to manage my time, my money, and my social life. Well, in this video, I'm going to answer exactly that question and a little bit more. Just before we start, I checked the subscriber data of people who were subscribed and not subscribed, and there's 92% of people not subscribed to my channel. So if you're not, hit the subscribe button below and let's get into the ultimate guide of living and working remotely in Malta. Let's start off with time management. And this was like super important for me because I didn't want to go from the UK where I was working kind of mostly indoors in the studio to then fly out to the wonderful location that is Malta and all the activities, experiences, and beautiful weather that it has to offer, and then basically do the same kind of thing but like working inside in the apartment all day. I had to have a good kind of plan where I could actually balance and manage my time between work and fun. And if you do want to check out some of the activities that I actually got up to and activities that I definitely recommend that you check out too if you're visiting the place, check out this video here where I go through all those different activities and give a little bit of insight on why I chose them and what I thought of them. So how was I actually able to manage my time? Well, I think the good thing about the team that I work with is work-life balance is like a super important thing in my team in Google. So like if I think back to those review videos where I was like looking at people who were complaining that they didn't have a good work-life balance from those Glassdoor reviews, well, for me that's kind of the opposite. We have a really strong work-life balance in our team, and it's actually a case of the work needs to get done, but if that takes 8 hours or 6 hours or whatever, it doesn't really matter as much as actually getting the work done, which is definitely the kind of vibe that I really like. So I definitely say that my team is more output focused than they are like hours focused. So that was definitely a really useful thing. Also, there was actually a few like Google wellness days. So I was actually able to do things like go snorkeling in the morning because there was a wellness day on that day, for example. And also like fundamentally, the Wi-Fi connection stretched from the apartment outside into the pool area. So if I was preparing like a presentation in the morning, I could in theory work from the terrace or I could work from the pool. As long as I was able to get that work done, that was fine. I actually thought the time zone difference was actually quite useful too because it meant I could actually start, get up early, get a load of work done, and I'd still be in like an hour ahead of the UK. So what that means is when we were kind of planning activities, and something we also did is like plan a few days in advance of like different friends coming. So we actually knew, who was working on this day or what day I was going to have off, etc. But what that meant is by having the time zone like an hour ahead of what it was in the UK, I could actually start my day early and either like get a load of work done in the morning and then finish earlier, or sometimes we decided to do like some morning activities. So like a couple of things we did early in the morning and I could still start my day at like 10, half 10, and that's like 9, half 9 in the morning. So that was actually quite a positive thing. When I worked and exactly where I worked didn't matter as much as long as the work was done and consistently done well. And what was really nice is the friends that I had who came and stayed with me were also working on their like own businesses too. So they kind of understood that they needed to get work done, I needed to get work done, and we basically just planned like 3 or 4 days in advance. So next up, let's talk about money.
Let's talk money.
And I think fundamentally here, if I was living in the UK versus deciding to go and live in Malta for a bit, it would have definitely been cheaper, right? That's just the facts. Like that would have literally been cheaper to me being in the UK versus going to Malta. However, like I don't necessarily feel like that is a reason to not do it, because the actual experience and the value and just like the mental health benefits of paying the extra money to stay in a different place for a while was actually like far more beneficial than just the cost saving of being in the UK. For example, I'm still living at home, so I pay my parents like a rent just for like food and living expenses while I'm actually at home. That's not as much as it would be if I was living in London or have my own flat, but I still kind of contribute. Whereas if I was living in Malta, I was basically paying for pretty much everything apart from like the council taxes and all that other stuff. So yeah, that was definitely an additional cost of paying for the rent and all of the food costs and everything like that I wouldn't have had if I was in the UK. But yeah, working in Malta, paying the rent and all the food and everything there would have definitely been cheaper than if I was living on my own and had my own rent and stuff in London. However, if I still had to pay that London rent while I was there, then yeah, it's not going to be as affordable if I'm like halfway through a 12-month lease. I'm basically paying double rent. However, if the pandemic taught me one thing, is that I could save up all this money and invest it and use it in the future. However, do you know what? Like, you're only going to be 25 years old once, you actually may as well use that money and spend it and actually travel with it, meet new people, try out some experiences and live in a different place, especially while I'm young, right? In terms of the apartment specifically, yeah, it was quite a fancy apartment, probably a little bit too fancy if I was being honest. But I think, having friends come reduced the cost massively. If I was going to stay in Malta for like 6, 12 months or like longer, probably wouldn't have lived in such a fancy place, to be honest. But actually for the weeks that I was living in Malta, even though it was quite expensive, friends came and subsidized it. It was super well located, and all the kind of like amenities like the swimming pool and everything that came along with the apartment was well worth having that additional extra cost. And actually living there as like a resident or like getting the Airbnb was way cheaper than if I was going to do the equivalent thing in a hotel, right? So I didn't have food included with the Airbnb because I don't know any Airbnbs that have food included, but I didn't have it in this one. And so because I didn't have that, because I didn't have all the whole expenses that come with being in a hotel, actually saved me like a decent amount compared to doing that. And in terms of like costs of transport and getting around, yeah, this was probably like a fairly big cost, I would say, in the sense of there was like a bus network, but most of the time that we couldn't walk to a place. So first instance, we'd try and walk to a place. If it was too far or you couldn't do that, then we'd usually pay for like a Bolt taxi, which was still like fairly affordable, maybe like 5 to 10 euros or something like that per person. So it wasn't so bad, but that was definitely a little bit of an expense. And also from like a food perspective, the actual food was probably, I would say 20-30% more expensive compared to being in the UK. I talked about this a little bit more in my expectations versus reality video, so check that out if you haven't already. But I think, yeah, generally 20-30% more in terms of food costs, and also because there wasn't as much choice as there would be in the UK. So that definitely added to a little bit of the cost, probably because most of it is imported. One thing that was really useful is I took my Monzo card with me, and that basically meant that I paid the perfect exchange rate from euros to pounds. Well, I say perfect, it was as good as the exchange rate can be, but yeah, it was like a decent exchange rate, and it also meant that I could roughly kind of budget a little bit on Monzo in terms of what I was spending on what. But to be honest, I didn't want to keep an eye too much because I didn't want to restrict myself to not be able to do certain activities or go to certain places based on money. My whole kind of budgeting investment thesis is actually I want to be bringing in more money than I'm spending, so I don't want to have to worry too much about having to budget or save or not be able to do things as a result of money. And finally, just from an activities point of view, most things are going to cost, but the fact that we had like the pool included meant that there was no additional cost for that. The fact that there was like the sea where you could literally just like jump and lay in like really nearby to our apartment also saved us a lot because we didn't have to get like a cab or like a bus or anything to actually go to a beach. And when we actually tried to get a bus one time, when the only one day that it was raining, the buses were like completely full anyway, so we couldn't have got a bus. So I think just having those convenient things within the location that you want to stay at, check that out before you go, because that saved a lot because we didn't have to pay to go to those places apart from the experiences we arranged. So lastly, let's talk about the social aspect of living and working remotely. So I think the key thing for me here is that if I was living in that apartment on my own for longer than the time that I was there, I think, yes, I would definitely have had like a little bit of loneliness starting to creep in. One of the best things and the best decisions I made was basically inviting people to come to the apartment and be like, hey man, do you want to come for like 3 or 4 days? Do you want to come for a week? Do you want to come for 2 or 3 days, like a weekend or something? That was the really best thing I did, because there was maybe only like a few days in which I was on my own in the apartment, and then, next week, okay, a friend was coming. So that was a really good thing. I think if I was going to stay longer term, I recently discovered these things called like Salinas, which are like these kind of co-living, co-working spaces that you can stay in. I would probably look for one of them. Don't know if they exist in Malta, but I'd look for the kind of equivalent thing where there's other people doing a similar digital nomad life and doing that in a different place. So I'd look for one of them if I was going to stay there longer. So I think, yeah, like in terms of meeting new people and being able to like go out, it would have been potentially a little bit more challenging for me personally to do that. I don't necessarily think I'm like super comfortable about like just going out to a random place with no one that I know. So I think if I was living in like a co-living space and was able to like meet and get to know people, that would be a little bit easier than just basically being in an apartment Obviously, like some of the nightclubs and things where you potentially would meet up with people when you're living there were shut, so it makes it a little bit harder. But I think generally there was no problems in terms of like loneliness or social aspect for me, because people came and stayed with me. And if I wanted to stay even longer than I did, I would make sure I stayed within a place that was set up to have a better social situation, where I was kind of like living or co-living or co-working with people. Definitely co-working space would have actually been a really good thing if people weren't coming to the apartment. So I would definitely look into that. So that was a rundown of my experience of working as a remote Google employee in Malta, and the experience of the time, money, and social aspects of being able to do that. If you liked this video, you'll probably find this video really insightful, which is me basically comparing what I expected it to be like living in Malta versus the actual reality of doing so. And there is plenty more content in this playlist right here. Check one of those out. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.